Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 28th, 2026. Today, we're going to take a look at what is happening in the tropics, including the Atlantic, in which nothing much is happening, and of course the Pacific, which continues to explode in activity, literally with actual storms that are exploding right now, including Typhoon Dolphin, which is taking the entire tropical tracking internet by surprise and by utter shock. As this is very quickly, rapidly intensifying and likely going to become an upper end typhoon within the next few days here. All things we're going to go over today. So, with that being said, let's get started. First off, by taking a look at the National Hurricane Center homepage to show you what is there to be expected in the Atlantic right now, and nothing over the next 7 days is expected in the tropical weather bulletin, at least from the National Hurricane Center. And I think that is pretty much the main point that you need to know about activity in the tropics right now. Nothing expected in the foreseeable future. In the Eastern Pacific, though, on the other hand, obviously things are more active. We have two storms right now. Tropical storm Fausto, weakened from a hurricane, which it was earlier in the week. And it continues to weaken as it's getting shredded apart by shear right now. And I'll show you the visible satellite shot of Fausto and the general Central Pacific as well in a little bit. But Fausto is really weakening here as it approaches Hawaii. And of course, it will pass just to the north, but that should especially help minimize any sort of impacts we will get from Fausto here in Hawaii. And there were never really any major impacts expected anyways. But Fausto is going to continue to wither away here as it continues on off to the west-northwest and probably will degenerate very soon. And then we have Hurricane Genevieve, also on a weakening trend right now after becoming a Category 5 hurricane yesterday. Maximum sustained winds at 125 miles an hour. So still a Category 3 major hurricane, but it is continuing to move on off to the west-northwest here, and it will move into cooler sea surface temperatures, and it is already doing so right now, and that is causing it to weaken. Plus, environmental conditions are also becoming less favorable as well. But it had a good run. It became a Category 5 and became the first major hurricane of the season in the Eastern Pacific, and it probably will not be the last. And taking a look at the satellite shot of the Eastern Pacific right now, you could see how things are across the East Pac right now. Quite a bit of convective activity. And of course, Genevieve sticking out as the most obvious feature, as the most obvious organized feature in the Eastern Pacific right now, and looks like it's still fighting, still has a fighting chance against it, with, an eye still prevalent, and the CDO is still, trying to maintain its round shape here, although it probably is dealing with a little bit of shear coming from the northwest, and again, it is moving into cooler sea surface temperatures as it continues on to the north, but still a major hurricane right now, and definitely still a pretty looking storm, and definitely was a pretty looking storm, especially at its peak yesterday, and it absolutely will probably go down in history as one of the most beautiful storms, in history. Obviously, we always get pretty hurricanes, but man, Genevieve was definitely a beauty. Luckily, though, and that's probably the best part about Genevieve, is that we got a beautiful and intense-looking hurricane that, was eye candy for all of the tropical trackers out there, and it stayed out to sea. It is not bringing any sort of major impacts, and no impacts are expected for Mexico or any coastline at all. Not even Hawaii needs to be worried about Genevieve. The remnants are going to go well to the north of Hawaii, and it's just going to wither away here over the next few days. Maybe bring some surf conditions and rip current risks to the Mexican coastline due to the swells that are obviously caused by the high amount of energy that is kind of, created by the ocean, by these storms. They really do send shockwaves of energy. That's how powerful hurricanes really are. And because of that, cause rip current risks, high rip currents and swells. And that'll obviously be good for surfers, but that too can be dangerous. And sometimes when people are not careful, rip currents can take lives. So keep in mind of that here over the next several days in the Eastern Pacific. But then again, looking at the track here, Genevieve is going to continue to weaken on off to the northwest, or kind of move on a northwest/west-northwest track. Probably will weaken back down to minimal, low-end hurricane status starting tomorrow, and then again just continue to wither away here as we head into the weekend, likely degenerating into a non-tropical low by the end of the weekend. Moving on into the Central Pacific now, and you can see here lots of convective activity happening right now. One of the classic products of strong westerly winds and lots of rising air in the atmosphere, all thanks to El Nino. But of course, you can see we have Fausto also withering away right now and really getting sheared to death. And obviously that is good news for Hawaii, as we're probably not going to get much at all in the way of impacts here, as this will, probably remain to the north anyways. But it is, nice to see. And of course, Fausto, another storm that we had. And it's so funny how it's really hard to get impacts here for Hawaii. Fausto looked like a long-range impact, and that's what happens most of the times here in the Central Pacific, is we'll have storms in the long range that threaten Hawaii with, ensembles showing activity going near, very close to, or over the islands, and then as you get closer in time, the track changes and, storms end up shifting to the north or to the south, or they get completely ripped apart and shredded by shear and just completely fall apart before they even make it to the islands here. So Hawaii, once again, going to be lucky and will be spared yet another storm, and with quite a impenetrable shield that they have, probably even stronger than the infamous Florida shield. Anyway, lots of convective activity in general throughout the Central Pacific, and you can even see here back to the very far west of the frame, Typhoon Dolphin, which is really a storm that exploded over the last day or so, and is likely going to become a high-end storm, a really, really high-end, monstrous super typhoon, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Moving on to the Atlantic now, let's see what's going on in the Atlantic basin, and I really had to quickly refresh the satellite here, and nothing happening in the Atlantic right now. Things have gone quiet after Bertha, and there's a lot of wind shear and dry air throughout the eastern MDR right now. Still seeing, though, these aggressive tropical waves move off the coast of Africa. There's a tropical wave right now, or it looks like a tropical wave right now, moving off the coast of Africa. And that's kind of been an interesting part about this season. We've, obviously atmospheric conditions are not very favorable across the Atlantic right now, all thanks to El Nino, which causes a very, very strong tropical jet here, which brings very strong westerly winds that cut across throughout the Caribbean and the MDR. And of course, the general atmospheric base state also causes lots of dry air, especially in the tropical Atlantic. But we still had these strong tropical waves which have come off the coast of Africa, and sometimes kind of even, perked a little bit of our interests. And it looks like there's another very strong wave here in the far eastern Atlantic, but that's probably going to wither away and not really amount to much of anything here over the next few days. And taking a look at the tropical waves right now in the Atlantic, we definitely have a few, and once again, the tropical wave train is definitely active, and looks like there's one here in the central Atlantic, and I did mention that there is one wave here in the far eastern Atlantic, just off the coast of Africa, not designated yet by the National Hurricane Center, but maybe they will very, very soon. But regardless, none of these waves are expected to develop, as is nothing here really expected to develop in the Atlantic. And I have the model here for the East Pac. I'll probably bring that up later on. We'll get to the models in just a little bit. Let's get through the rest of the discussion first here, and taking a look at the vorticity as well to kind of highlight and show you, is there anything trying to spin up in the Atlantic right now? And there really is nothing. We kind of just have a bunch of strung out vorticity here in the MDR. Again, probably some tropical wave energy with that. And we also have some pieces of energy here associated with a front off the East Coast, and that is one thing that we are also seeing right now. Lots of subtropical energy here associated with fronts and extratropical cyclones coming off the East Coast. And we also see this very commonly in El Nino years, and a lot of them end up, turning into cutoff lows, which turn into tuts as in, tropical upper tropospheric troughs, which is a very fancy way of saying, features that will shear the Atlantic to death. So, not a very favorable setup, and very typical setup of El Nino we are seeing across the Atlantic basin right now. And obviously, that is producing some energy here in the vorticity. And sometimes, again, with these waves, with, these troughs that bring fronts that come off the coast of, the U.S. here, can sometimes break pieces of energy off on the tail end of the front, especially. That's how Bertha was able to form here in the Gulf last week, but it doesn't look like anything like that is happening right now. Not especially anything like this you see here in the Eastern Pacific, and that's the vorticity reflection of Genevieve. And this is probably a perfect, case study to show you what a well-developed storm looks like on the vorticity signature. Well-rounded vorticity, values topping the chart here. And of course, we don't see any of that right now happening in the Atlantic. Moving on to the Western Pacific, though, because that's really where all the activity is right now, especially the Western Pacific. Boy, are they really active this year. And they are getting ready to produce yet another beast. This is Typhoon Dolphin you are looking at. And if you remember us talking about Typhoon Dolphin yesterday, it was really a tropical storm. It was just getting started yesterday from an invest that crossed over from the Central Pacific, but it really rapidly intensified overnight and is now a typhoon. I believe, in fact, it's already a major strength typhoon. And you can see here in the recent satellite frames, first off, at the beginning of the frame, it had a pinhole eye, meaning it had a very, very small eye here, and you typically do not see that. You only see these kind of setups with very, very intense storms, but because it has a pinhole eye, it's become unstable, and it looks like it is now undergoing eye wall replacement cycle in the most recent latest frames here, and that's probably a dead giveaway from the fact that the eye especially has kind of wobbled towards the end of the satellite loop here. But make no mistake, this is more than likely just a temporary thing, and especially once eye wall replacement cycles finish with these tropical cyclones, especially in the Western Pacific that have days of very favorable conditions ahead of them, they usually blossom after those eye wall replacement cycles and become very, very powerful typhoons. And that is exactly what Dolphin here is expected to do. This is the forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and taking it out for the next few days, roughly by July 31st here, their forecast by 12Z from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, they expect up to 165 knots in intensity, and that is roughly equivalent, I believe, to 190 miles an hour. So yeah, they are explicitly forecasting a upper end Category 5 hurricane or typhoon in this case from the Western Pacific here. And I believe if this happens, this would probably be the third super typhoon of the season. It's El Nino, all right, when you are having, already 3 or 4 super typhoons, and we are not even into the month of August yet. And this is what happens in the Western Pacific during very strong El Nino years, especially. They become machines for producing these very, very powerful, monstrous typhoons. And, they already forecast this to become a Category 5 by Thursday, July 30th. And from there, all the way up until the very end of the forecast here, which goes out to the end of the week, they expect this to remain at Category 5 intensity. So we might be looking at a long duration, a storm that, stays at very, very high intensity for a very long duration, which is not, impossible and not atypical in the Western Pacific, especially in years like this. And probably one of the biggest causes is because of how warm things are in the Pacific right now. Just take a look at the sea surface temperatures. Dolphin right now is sitting in a bath of 29 degrees Celsius waters, and taking a look at its track, which is expected to move on off to the northwest here over the next few days, it's only moving into more warmer sea surface temperatures, potentially as much as 31, probably some pockets of 31 degrees Celsius ahead of it here. So it has warmer sea surface temperatures coming up, and atmospherically, this will absolutely have the most favorable conditions it possibly could have. So it is absolutely going to blossom, and it's going to be working with rocket fuel for rapid intensification, and the tropical cyclone heat potential as well. Very, very prominent and very ample throughout the Western Pacific here, especially throughout the tropics. And so lots of upper ocean heat content that this will be able to work with. And upper ocean heat content, if you're not familiar with, basically just means the amount of energy that is in the ocean that tropical cyclones can use. And the more upper ocean heat content there is, the more energy and heat that is being stored below the ocean, not just at the surface, not just do we have, 30 degrees Celsius waters, but that water extends deep, and very warm into the depths of the ocean, which just means more energy for tropical cyclones to be able to feed off of and intensify very, very quickly. And that's very prevalent here in the West Pacific and pretty much the entire Pacific right now, and especially here along the equator. And I think we all know why with El Nino. I mean, one of the prime aspects of El Nino was storing large amounts of heat and energy in the ocean, especially along the equator, which is, how we measure El Nino in the first place. And obviously that has a very influential aspect on the ocean, like producing or allowing the atmosphere to produce very powerful and long-tracked and intense typhoons like we are seeing here with Dolphin. So here's the model forecast over the next few days, taking this out to the next 2 weeks here. This is the European ensembles, and you can see all of them are very, very keen on Dolphin here, becoming a very, very strong typhoon over the next few days. And it's probably going to become a Category 5 here very soon, probably by the end of the day, definitely by tomorrow, especially once it's able to get past the Zywall replacement cycle, and it'll probably last as a Category 5 typhoon for quite some time. And then eventually, as we get towards the week 2 time frame, it's going to begin to make a bend here back to the west. It's moving in a west-northwest to northwest direction now, but eventually all of the models bring this back towards the west, and that will make things very interesting in terms of the potential for land impacts for Japan, potentially China, and potentially Korea as well. So, large areas of land here need to be watching for the potential of impacts from Typhoon Dolphin. This is not going to be one of those out to sea, impacts, or not impacts. It's going to be out to sea. Well, this won't be out to sea, but it's not going to be one of those out to sea typhoons that are very pretty to look at, but don't really cause any harm to anyone. Unfortunately, will not be the case with this storm. This will likely be a land impact for somebody, but the thing is, it could be anywhere from China, Korea, or to Japan, but any impacts that do happen will more than likely happen in the week 2 time frame, so well beyond 7 days. So there's going to be a lot of tracking that needs to happen here in the Western Pacific, and a very long week ahead, probably a very long 2 weeks ahead coming up here, as all eyes will be on Dolphin. And not just that, but take a look at the ensembles here for all of the other activity that is expected in the Western Pacific as well. I mean, things just really light up. And again, that is a classic served to you by El Nino. And the Western Pacific afterwards is probably going to be producing storm after storm. And, we're probably yet another strong storm here in the Western Pacific will probably, follow right behind Dolphin here once everything is said and done. Moving on to the Atlantic right now with the GFS, taking a look at things over the next 7 days, and you can just see everything is expected to remain quiet here. We're going to continue to have these tropical waves, which will move off the coast of Africa, as I've been mentioning, but nothing solid consolidates. You don't see the vorticity bundling and developing a round, tight shape like I showed you earlier with the signature that we have in the Eastern Pacific with Genevieve. We're not seeing that develop here at all in the model. over the next week. And obviously that could change. There could be, something that pops up short range that the model cannot see right now. And I think that was the case with Bertha, at least with the GFS. So very well that could happen, and we could maybe be, caught off by surprise by something. You never say never. It is hurricane season after all, but there are no overwhelming signals right now on the GFS for tropical activity over the next week in the Atlantic. And then in the Eastern Pacific, to round it all off here, Genevieve continuing to move on off to the west-northwest will take a westerly turn probably as we get towards the weekend, and then eventually it's going to fade out here as it moves over cooler water, and eventually will not be any more of a concern to anybody. And then the Eastern Pacific after that kind of looks a little quiet here on the models, but that's probably not going to last long, considering the fact that things are more than likely going to remain very favorable in the Eastern Pacific for the next few weeks here. And obviously we will talk about that more in depth here later on, but I can tell you right now, things are absolutely going to remain favorable for more activity to happen. It's just a matter of whenever any other model signals pick up on any activity. Not really picking up on anything right now, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm telling you, that will more than likely change. With that being said, though, that's going to wrap it up for today's discussion. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate if you liked this video, comment any thoughts you have below, and subscribe to the channel for more tropical weather updates, which we will be doing on a daily basis throughout the rest of hurricane season. So make sure to stay tuned for that if you are interested in not just on, updates on the tropics for the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic, but of course, as we've done today, I will also update you on the Western Pacific as well, as things really look like they will be heating up there. So if you want updates all across the board on the wide world on the worldwide tropics, make sure to stay tuned, and I will definitely be providing them. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I will be back with more tomorrow. See you then.